and it says it was in the city of Antioch on this occasion that the disciples, followers of Jesus, were first called Christian. It was a name given to them by outsiders. They always talked about the Christ, and those are the Christ people, the Christians. It's not a name Jesus used. A nickname. I guess most of them liked it, and so they kept it. It's an important point. The Qur'an doesn't make that mistake. What do you suppose Arabic Christians call themselves? Call themselves Christians. Masihin, the Messiah people. As they don't be confused, Messiah equals Christ. Christ is from the Greek word that means the same thing as Messiah means in the Hebrew. But the Qur'an doesn't call the disciples of Jesus Masihin. It talks about the Nasara, which is the only thing you'll ever find in the Bible actually applied to them as reported in the time of Jesus. They were the sect of the Nazarenes. Whatever that means is beside the point. But if you see what I'm getting at, if everyone is calling themselves Christian and you're writing a book that talks about them, you might be tempted to call them Christian. That's what they call themselves. That would be a mistake if you put the word Christian on the lips of Jesus or the disciples in your book, because they didn't call themselves by that name at that time. It would be an anachronism, if you see what I mean. It'd be like writing a story about ancient Rome and you talk about somebody wearing a wristwatch. Say it would be something out of place in time. It's an interesting little detail of accuracy in the Qur'an. In trying to explain some of the things that divide people, or why you find the situation as it is today, keep in mind that in the first place you will probably know more than most people know on the street. It's not widely known. It's not like people sit and discuss these things. When I first met the woman that I later married, I asked her, she was working where I worked, I asked her about herself. She said, I'm a Christian. I said, which church? Told me the church. I said, you must believe this and this and this, certain points. She said, no. I said, go ask. She says, no, they never talk about that. We don't believe that. She went and asked the pastor, came back to me and said, we believe that. Officially, it's not talked about. That's in many cases. Certain things are talked about, certain things aren't. She had the same experience with our neighbor sometime after that, when she said to her neighbor one day, who every every Sunday went to Trinity United Church. The United Church is a sort of a Canadian institution that's it's the greatest number of people, I suppose. But the name of this particular church was Trinity. That building, Trinity United Church. So she asked the neighbor one time, do you know what Trinity means? She goes there every Sunday. The woman said, no, actually. So my wife said, well, the Trinity by definition is, and she told her 1, 2, 3. And this woman said, was kind of surprised at that. A strange look on her face, and my wife said, do you believe that? She said, I don't think so. See, it's not generally talked about. It is in some churches, yes, but by and large, certain things are not really discussed. So you may, if you're equipped in some ways, know more than the average person. It frequently happens now in North American society. I get telephone calls from people in different places. They are Americans who've come to Islam, and then they get into discussions with Christians, and they're hearing about something they didn't know about before, and they call and ask. And they'll tell me, I talked to a Christian yesterday, and he told me this and this and this. And I know by what he said that, well, what you were talking to was one of these kinds of Christians, not, a particular denomination. They're the ones who say that. And this is a new idea to them. They start to appreciate, you mean there's different kinds, and they believe different things, and so on. That comes as news to them. So it is that, in fact, there are so many different kinds of beliefs that there's almost nothing that you can say about Christianity, and every Christian will say, yes, that's true. Just about anything that you might say about Christianity, you'll find some Christian who will say, well, they believe it, but we don't. We're the true Christians. Or maybe vice versa. They may say, yes, we believe that, they don't, and so on. In other words, there's no statement broad enough. Virtually anything a Muslim will say, you'll find some Christian who'll say, you're right. just about anything. You want to say God is one, Jesus is not the Son of God, there's Christians who say that. You want to say don't eat pork, there's Christians who say that, as we mentioned before. They come in a wide range, so be careful if you say, the Christians, they say this. The Qur'an is careful in that way. When it talks about certain issues, it says, those among the people of the book who say such and so, singles them out. Or say, a party of them say such and such. It doesn't usually paint them all the same color with one wide sweep of a brush. Different kinds. Now, ancient history may contain a lot of the origins of Christianity, and that's an interesting subject. There's a number of books available that way. There's one called Pagan Christs. There's one called The Paganism in Our Christianity. There's various other books on that subject. If you browse through the religious section of a library, you should be able to find these, which will show you, and these are by Christian authors, not by people who hated Christianity. Christian authors will tell you how this was an ancient pagan belief and it has come into our belief. But that's okay. I'll tell you why, usually. But what explains more the reality of the modern situation is an understanding of Christianity in the last few hundred years, to go from the time of the Protestant Reformation, when up until about 500 years ago, Europe was mostly all under one church. There were always people in this place or that place, somebody who was against that. They stood as small groups. You had Catharists, Socinians, Unitarians, people in various places right back through the centuries. As I mentioned, there's a book by J.N.D. Kelly called Early Christian Doctrine. He states there, and it's a Christian writing, it's a book that's basic in Christian schools, that is seminaries, people study for the ministry, which tells you that it was a common heresy in the first century that Jesus wasn't crucified. Heresy is his word, it means lie. Well, whether he thinks it's a lie or not, the point is he says it's common, lots of people used to say it, lots of Christians used to say it. A heresy is supposed to be a lie that somebody within the system tells. He's a heretic. This man can't be a Christian anymore. He's guilty of a heresy, is how it works. So he's saying this is not some new Muslim issue, this is an old thing lots of people used to say. People who said we follow Jesus. Some of them used to deny it. But in any case, there have been people like that here, there, down through the centuries, but you really come to a major split in the Protestant Reformation, and this gives an understanding, very generally speaking, of the two frames of mind that exist in Christianity today. Martin Luther was a priest who became unsatisfied with himself, very much so, saying that I want to do good and I always do bad. I try hard to do good, but I keep doing bad. And he became so disgusted with this difficulty that it occurred to him there must be a different way. I'm not capable of doing good. I always do bad no matter how much I want to do good. And so he came up with a different idea. It used to be that people, I'm speaking broadly and simply, but people used to regard sin as a thing you did that's wrong. Did a bad thing, you sinned. Luther said, well, no. We do bad things, yes, but sin is something that happens before we did the bad thing. Sin is when we didn't believe. Our sin is unfaith. I failed to have faith. That's where I sinned. I didn't have faith anymore. And of course, after that, I do bad things. So in that way, that vague term faith tended to put a new idea on the intellectual processes that people carried out, which has become widespread today. I've seen little pamphlets handed out. You'll find them around here, I'm sure, where people will tell you about sins. And they'll tell you sins, bad things that people do and so on, are they steal and